Flip it on and go. Santash, move over a bit. Okay, ready? Now, okay, I'm happy. If there's other questions to take them, but I've had already 2 people ask me to speak about the Megillat of Ruth that we read on Shavuot. So if there's other questions, I'm happy to take them as well. Or if not, that's going to be what we're going to talk about. Okay. Now, usually, most years I do about 3 or 4 part series on it, which I think why I got asked about it. And this year, not able to do that, unfortunately. I mean, various clashes and stuff. So I'm going to try and get in 45 minutes the overview of what's going on in this book. Now, we should know that Chazal themselves, the rabbis themselves, tell us that, well, first of all, like, why do we even read the story of Ruth on Shavuot? What's the tradition come from? And this is well known. There's a few different answers. You can tell me if you've heard any first, what you've heard, or what you think. So one simple answer is this conversion, right? Just like we accepted the Torah on Shavuot, so too Ruth is a story of an actual convert who accepts joining the Jewish people and keeping the Torah. She's Amech Ami. She says to her mother-in-law, "Your people are my people. Elokai Elokai, your God will be my God." Right? So a conversion. If that was all there was to it, then there would be a question why we don't just read the first chapter. But okay, it's a short Megillah, you can read the whole thing. Another reason brought down is that it is Shavuot is the day of the birth and death of King David. And the Book of Ruth, she is his great-great-great-grandmother. And in fact, the very last word of the book is him. We go through quick genealogy, going all the way back through from the tribe of Yehuda to, and we end with David, right? But that's the very end, the last word, right? Is Yishai Holedes David, Yishai gave birth to David. So that would also potentially cover it. Another idea that's brought down is that the time of year that the main events take place, right? They cut the distraught, like broken family of Naomi and surviving her daughters-in-law. She lost her husband and her 2 sons. They return to the land of Yehuda, of Judea, at the Tchilas Ketira Chitim, at Za'urim, so at the beginning of the barley festival, which is known as the Omer. The very first barley offering is called the Omer. It's on the 2nd day of Pesach, first day of Chol HaMoed. And they literally arrive then, and then they get to the Ketira Chitim, the wheat time, so that's literally this time of the year. Okay, so these are all possibilities. I want to show something else. I want to give, by the way, I have 2 sources of a lot of the material I'm going to say. There are individual thoughts that might be more my own, but for the most part, I saw a lot of this in a book called Rising Moon by somebody called Rabbi Miller. And I used to also, I told you many times, I used to go to Shiur when I was in the Old City, so I used to go on Shavuot night. The same Rabbi Weinberger gave a lot of Shiur I used to listen to, gave a whole night, like for hours on Shavuot night. So I went a few years and I learned lots of different ideas from that. What I want to do is show the fundamental theme. Now Chazal tell us, the rabbis themselves tell us, rabbis always means the ancient rabbis of the Gemara and the Medrash, tell us that this book did not come to teach us not what's prohibited and permitted, not what's pure and impure, only to talk about chesed, kindness, loving kindness, and its reward. Which immediately puts you on alert that thematically this is a book about chesed, kindness. Now we see lots of individual acts of chesed, but it's not obvious you would necessarily have called that the topic of the book, and that's clearly how the rabbis see it. Another point to note, and that's what we're going to try and understand. Okay, and how does that link to Shavuos, to receiving Torah, to all these various things? The other thing that we want to look at is the opening and closing. This is a very good, I was asked to speak about the Book of Ruth of Megillat Ruth, so that's what we're talking about today. So the opening and closing, challenges, get it all in 45 minutes. The opening and closing of a book in Tanakh is often a clue as to what the journey is. And the book opens with the words of Vahi b'mei Shavuot HaShoftim, it's in the days the judges judged, and it ends with the birth of the person who's going to begin the Davidic, the monarchy that we have till the Messianic times, till Mashiach. So that would imply a political book, right? Transitioning from the era of the Shoftim, the era of anarchy or the tribal confederacy, where there was no central leader unless they needed for war, to the point where there's actual monarchy. Okay, there's the failed monarchy of Saul, and then there's the Davidic monarchy. So you'd expect it to be a book about political philosophy, right? And instead it's a book about chesed, it's a book about kindness and relationships. And what I'm going to argue is that is the same thing, meaning the Torah's view of what it takes to transition into Malchus, into kingship, requires a rectification at the fundamental level of relationship. So let's put all this in. What is the chesed that it's coming to teach? So the opening chapter sets a scene. Let me just very quickly set a set of scenes. There's a famine in the land. The rich are going across to Jordan, to Moab, and this particular family that we're looking at, Elimelech's family, Elimelech has two sons. He goes with his wife Naomi, the two sons. They marry Moabite women, and all the males die. And then the family wants to return. Ruth is accompanied by her two daughters-in-law. Naomi is accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. She persuades Orpah not to join, and Ruth clings on. And Ruth gives this famous speech, where you go, I go, where you lie, I lie, all this kind of stuff. Well, your people are my people, your God's my God, and that's it. And then they come back in. That's the chapter, kind of, you simply sum it up. But it's full of hints at a much deeper issue. And the deeper issue is what we might call the problem of chesed, the problem posed by loving kindness, that is a psychological problem, a sociological problem, and a theological problem, right? Lots of ologies we threw in there, but I'll explain what I mean. First of all, let's just look at the opening verse. It wasn't the days the judges judged. That's not even the first posuk yet, right? Just literally the first three words. What are they coming to do? So ostensibly, I'd say to locate it in time. The problem is it's a very poor locator, for the simple reason that the days the judges judge span several centuries. Now, which judge? Is it Yiftach? Is it Gidon? Is it Shimshon? I mean, there's lots of judges. I read about 12 of them in the Book of Judges, and there may have been more. So, which judge? I mean, you're not just so it's like somewhere in medieval times. I mean, it's not totally useless, but it's not that helpful. So the rabbis say the word shvota shoftim is actually ambiguous. It can be read in two ways. One is when the judge is judged. I mean, that's a redundant phrase anyway. What else the judges do? Just say Vayibim shoftim. It wasn't the days of the judges. But it can also be read as shvata, they judged the judges. In other words, and the Gemara says, like, must have been some Aramaic phrase or something. Before you'd say, take the toothpick out of your eyes, the guy would say, well, take the toothpick out of your teeth. The guy would say, take the beam between your eyes. In other words, meaning they're being accused of hypocrisy. Either it means the judges themselves were corrupt and the people saw that, or the judges weren't corrupt, but the people were looking out with a microscope on everything they did wrong, and they'd lost their authority. Somewhere it hints in the first three words at a deep sociological problem. Somewhere the judges have lost the trust of the people, either because the people are bad or the judges are bad. Something's gone wrong. Next, they have a social breakdown. Then by Hira'ov Ba'aretz, there's a famine in the land. So now you've got an economic breakdown. You've got a religious breakdown, if you like, religious authority breakdown. You've got an economic breakdown. Next, you get a fabric of society breakdown. Vayelech Ish Beis Lechem Yehuda. A man went from Bethlehem in Judea, Lagur B'stei Moav, to sojourn in the fields of Moav. Hu ve'ishto Shnei Vanov. He, his wife, and his two sons. Now, the funny thing is, like, we're going to learn their names. So why does it present them anonymously? Literally, the next verse says, oh, the name of the man, by the way, is called Elimelech, and his wife is called Naomi. So just tell us that straight away. So one possible answer, you see this at other times in Tanakh, is when it uses anonymity, but it will later fill it in. It is what you might call in English a schematic sentence, meaning it could apply to anybody. It happens to be we're talking about one particular person. Ish is a nobleman. It's a word for man, but it usually means somebody of nobility. So the nobleman, his wife and children are leaving town. And it happens to be we're talking about a particular person. Now let's focus on this for a moment. Why would a nobleman leave town in a famine? They're the only people who don't need to worry. They're the big landowners. They have enormous granaries. The poor people struggle in the famine. They're the ones who starve and die. The rich people, in those days wealth was food, the people with enormous food are not the ones who starve and die. Just by the way, the climate of Moab, which is Jordan, is not very different to Israel. It's a little bit better climate because you get the precipitation from the Jordan River. But generally, if there's a famine here, there's a famine there. So why would they go? And the implication of all of this is they weren't leaving because they were starving. Why else would rich people leave town in a famine?
Revolt.
Was that?
Revolt.
Revolt? Maybe they know it was a revolt.
They don't want to help the poor people.
They don't want to help the poor people. And the implication of all of this is not wanting to help the poor people. Fascinatingly enough, they go across to Moab. Moab is a civilization characterized in the Torah as they have the biblical laws. So long as there was a culture that was still operating as Moab, even if they converted as a Jew, you'd have to wait 3 generations. You couldn't take the men into and actually marry them. Why not? Because Moab, when we traveled in the desert and wanted to come to that and were at their border, they refused to give any food provisions. Most populations in the ancient world were very good at hospitality, and Moab stood for being anti-hospitality. And because of that, if a Moabite man converted, they couldn't immediately marry into the people. They had to wait a few generations. One of the interesting questions in this story was going to be, what about Moabite woman? It turns out a Moabite woman can. But it was seen to have been because the cultural identity was primarily carried to the males, and the males seem to have an aversion to kindness. And so it's a great place to go in a famine. If you're the rich and you don't want to help the poor, go to a culture where there's no charity, basically. That's where you run to. But it turns out the origin story of Moab, fascinatingly enough, is in exactly the same place. Does anybody know a biblical town that was characterized by its antithesis to hospitality? It's Sodom. Sodom, and Moab was created in Sodom. Why? Because remember, Avram's nephew Lot ran to Sodom. Again, we have to get to why, but he left Abraham and went to Sodom. Very strange. And he went to the place on earth that hates kindness. Eventually God says this is a place that kills strangers who come in, and it has to be destroyed. And Abraham prayed, if there's 50 righteous people, God said, there 50 righteous, I'd save them. I'd save all the cities. 40, 30, that's not even 10 righteous people. In the end, only Lot himself gets saved. Abraham's prayer saves Lot, and everybody else gets destroyed. And then that night they go to a cave because they're so petrified. You can imagine they've been traumatized by everything around them, been destroyed. The only survivors in the cave are Lot and his daughters. The Torah tells us that they believed they were the last people alive, or they weren't going to go anywhere. They're trying to find other people. And so there was a vineyard or grapevine nearby. They got their father drunk, and they had children through him. And the first one had a child, called it Moab, which literally means from the father, right? Hence the name. So Moab was born in Sodom. It was born in an anti-kindness city, and it became its continuation in the world, the anti-kindness. And so you can begin to see a book talking about kindness is going to begin with all the breakdown of Israelite Judean society, where the spirituality is broken down, the economy is broken down, and the social fabric is broken down, and people are going to the world that hates or that resists kindness. Now, why would anybody resist kindness? Because that's the backdrop of the whole story. And it turns out there's actually quite good reason. And let's say the very first person who walks away from kindness to anti-kindness is Lot, Avram's nephew. Abraham is the man who's characterized in the prophet as a man of kindness. Titain emes li'Yaakov chesed Avram, kindness is for Abraham. His entire tent of welcoming in strangers, he is the man. He and his wife, Avram and Sarah, stand for, and their midah is that we attribute to them, their characteristic is loving kindness. They talk about God's loving kindness, they talk about their own loving kindness, they're just doing kindness all day long. And Lot, the nephew, who Avram has raised as a child, he adopted him, took him in, gave him everything, leaves all of that and goes to the antithesis, anti-kindness. Why? The Torah tells you that everything Lot had was Avram's. It says, Avram. Also Lot, when it talks about Abraham's wealth, who went with Abraham had all this wealth. And the Abarbanel points it out. Also, right, Rashi actually says that what made him rich and famous was his relationship with Abraham. So why would you abandon all of that? And the Abarbanel says, do you know why you would abandon all of that? The man who's cared for you your entire life. You're just like an adjunct of him, and he's looked after you. You'd abandon all and run to the antithesis. Do you know why? Exactly for that reason. Gam lelot ha'olech Avram, also to Lot, who went with Abraham as well. He felt like Mr. Also. He's not the center of the world. He's an adjunct. He's not an individual of his own standing. Just imagine this. Imagine you're Lot, and your entire life has basically been one chesed project, one kindness project from your uncle. You're now a grown man, and nobody can think outside this realm. You're still just a dependent. You're completely dependent on your uncle. Everything you are and everything you've been is his. And there's a sense of a crushing sense of a failure of dignity. It's incredibly undignified. Imagine he goes to a business deal and says, "Hi, I'm Lot, Abrahamic Lot. I'd like to come and talk about. Oh yeah, we'll deal with your uncle, kind of thing. Me and Abe, we get on. We'll put you in the room as well." He's nobody. And that's how he feels. And he creates within him this repulsion against kindness. He says, do you know what kindness is? Kindness is very nice for you, Mr. Kind, charitable giver, Mr. Philanthropist. But do you know what it is for a recipient? It's humiliating. And you're running around the world giving. Do you know what it's doing to the rest of us? Crushing, and crushing. You're creating, it's a very interesting thing that in the chapters of the Torah that deal with adultery, one of the words used is chesed. And Rashi says it relates to Aramaic of humiliation, right? The behavior is humiliating. But the point is that what we see from that is the flip side. We said this whole book's coming to teach about chesed, and it begins in the anti-chesed, anti-kindness world. Well, the word chesed has two meanings. Loving kindness. I'm talking about the Book of Ruth. Too many people ask me to, so I'm going to try and get it all into one session. Right? We'll do a lot of skipping, but talk about the book, loving kindness, and the flip side of that meaning of the word itself is humiliation, shame. And we can see why. From one perspective, you're giving kindness. From the other perspective, the person is losing dignity. And Lot says, and this, by the way, Lot says, I don't want any of this. I'm going to leave you, Avram, and I'm going to go to the one place on earth that understands just how terrible kindness is. Today you'll do charity, tomorrow you'll build a welfare state, and day after that you'll have a dependent civilization. That's like, you can imagine like the political conversation. And the deep point is, this is really a bigger issue than we think. Because this is an issue every kid faces in how to deal with their parents. The mitzvah of honoring parents is not easy, amongst other things, because it can be seen as a horrifically one-way relationship, a very imbalanced power, because all the parents are done. I'm talking about healthy parental relationship, not talking about where there's been very unhealthy behavior, but just human beings, right? Imperfect, but try to be loving parents. The kids has grown up in a world where they've been dependent upon their parent, and there's something that loses, literally the word dependence, right? They lose their independence. So that can be everything from a 2-year-old who wants to say no, to the teenager who slams the door, and so, right, to the resentment that it builds of, imagine a teenager trying to have an argument with their parents, and the subtext, the unwritten statement is, I gave you life. I looked after you when you were a kid. I was changing your nappy when you needed it. I paid for your school. How dare you argue with me? You're a nobody standing in front of me. You're an adjunct. You're an expression of me. I control what you get. And that sense of face-to-face with the parents is an extreme lack of dignity, is why the mitzvah of honoring parents needs real work. It should be so natural, but it's not, because we're built into it as a resistance. And the same thing happens in our relationship with God. Consciously, of course, we honor God, but subconsciously, there's some resentment there. And it's expressed in the Gemara in Sanhedrin that says that when Adam stood before God, and after the sin, he says, V'oichel, and I ate, but you can also read it, and I will eat. In other words, I'm enjoying this. My sense of independence. I've violated your will. I've stopped just being an expression of your thoughts. And this is built into the problem of how we have relationships that are dependent, full stop. How do you have a relationship with God? How do you receive the Torah? That's literally what it's built into. The Torah is, the Gemara says about it, that there was no choice. It was God hung the mountain over their heads. Now, the way the Maharal says it doesn't necessarily mean literally, figuratively, literally put it up there. It means they were so clear that there is no life without this. The infinite creator of the universe who's given you everything, now gives you the pathway to eternity. Of course you've got to say yes. And what does that mean of you? What's the point of our free will? Whether we can keep it or not. There's a resentment. There's a resistance. Imkein mudar rabbaloi raisa. The Gemara says you've got the greatest get-out clause of all. It was compelled. It was forced. The Maharal compares it to a relationship where you've got zero choice. There's worse versions of that, right? In the Torah, if a person forces himself onto another person in a relationship, then they're stuck with them forever, right? So the Maharal talks about this, meaning if the other person wants. That's another whole discussion. But this is a serious issue. It's a psychological issue at the core of our religious identity. A part of us subconsciously that we don't necessarily admit to ourselves wants to kick God out of the way, wants to reject the Torah. And now we begin to see how all of these themes are going to therefore be very related to Shavuot. So and by the way, you see this extremely strongly in a very bizarre episode in the first chapter, because there's this peculiar dialogue. Everybody's died, all the men have died. And Melech's died, Nachman's died, Killian's died, the husband and the 2 sons have died. And now Normie's got nothing. She wants to go back home. And her 2 daughters-in-law travel with her. And then comes this fascinating dialogue. It says, Vatoma Naomi at verse 8, and Naomi says to two daughters-in-law, go, return each woman to her mother's house. God should do chesed, the first time the word appears in this Megillah. May God do kindness to you, like you did with the dead and with me. May God give you rest, each one find a husband. Right, good Jewish mother-in-law over here, find you a nice shidduch. This is and they said, no, ki yitachna shalamach, we're going, verse 10, we're going back with your people. And Naomi says, then comes something very strange. She's got to try and dissuade them. Just do a thought exercise. Imagine for a moment you were trying to dissuade them from coming. What might you say? What might you say? Not what does she say? It's dangerous. You won't be welcome. And this is socially broken down town, xenophobic. No one's going to marry you. What's that? Expensive, right? Here you get looked after. There you're going to be a pauper with nothing. You can imagine lots of... Listen to what she says. She says... Showed but I say, go back, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Do I still have children in my womb? There be for your husband? Well, she gone crazy. Oh, we never thought about that one. Oh, okay, fine. I guess I presume you're not pregnant, so I'm going to go home. Well, what are you talking about? They're willing to give up everything and go after her. Now, what's it got to do with whether she could be pregnant or not? But she doubles down. Shovna ben Osai, verse 12. Go back, my daughters. I'm too old to have a husband. They probably think she's nuts, But now let's suppose I did have hope. Let's suppose I get married tonight. Let's suppose I can have children. That's it. Are you going to wait till they get up? Again, you're going to be anchored. That's the word aguna, right? Chained, anchored, not to marry another man. No, my daughters, I'm too bitter. And the incredible thing about this bizarre speech that has absolutely no convincing argument whatsoever is it works. Orpah kisses goodbye. And Chazal actually, the rabbi says she becomes known by another name, Harapah, which you see at the end of the book of Shmuel, base, second Shmuel, that all the children were trying to kill King David, Ruth's children. It's like she turns the exact opposite. And Ruth clings on as if like a hurricane has just blown out of all of this. And then Ruth gives us a contradictory speech. She says, Al tifki bi le'ozveich, don't push me to abandon you. And as you keep talking, I will abandon you. Naomi says, yeah, but that's the whole point. No, I will never abandon you. Where you go, I go. Where you lie, I lie. Right? Your people's my people. Your God's my God. Where you die, I'll die. There I'll be buried. What's going on? So this is what Weinberg explained. And I think it's absolutely, once you see the whole pattern, it's clear. What's going on is this. She's saying, daughters-in-law, you realize you're Moabites, you're sensitive to this problem. Do you realize you've become completely dependent upon me? That's why you're coming with me? Isn't that the whole point of your civilization, to understand that dependence is a terrible thing? What are you going to do next? Do you see how absurd this is? You can't live without me, that's why you're coming with me? What are you going to do, wait for children from me? Is that how dependent you've become? And Orpah says, oh my goodness, you're right. I had completely become so absorbed into you that I have stopped being able to perceive life without you, and that's why I'm following you. I have become everything our culture resists. I have become completely dependent. And she kisses goodbye and turns literally the next pasuk. Naomi says, she's gone back to her people and her gods. Right? She's willing to give everything for Judaism, and no, she's sick of it all. She's like the person who woke up one day and realized, oh my goodness, I've been in a cult. Got to dedicate the rest of my life to destroying it. That's it. And Ruth clings on. She says, if you push me, I will let you go. Meaning, I will abandon you. Meaning, I don't depend on you. Why am I going to follow you? Because I admire you. I independently see you as having something I also want. So I'll do everything. I'm going to follow you around, even if we never talk again. Feel it? So in other words, this is the power of what's happening. Ruth is acutely aware of the issue, but she's not, because I'm not coming to you because I'm dependent. I know it looks admiration and dependence can seem very similar, but they're not the same thing at all. And then comes a very powerful last line of the opening chapter. Vatosh of Naomi, and Naomi returns. They're now back home. Ruth the Moabite, Kalosa, her daughter-in-law, Ima with her. Hashava Mistei Moav, who's also returned from the fields of Moab. Now you can say Naomi's returned, because to return means you've been there before. How can Ruth be returning? When was she ever here? And here we're told by the Medrash, she was here. I mean, we're hinted at in the Medrash actually. She was here. Lot left Abraham. because of this deep fissure, this rupture over this issue of how Avram can live his life of kindness without destroying somebody. And we've been waiting for him to return with the answer. 800 years later, she's back. This is what we've been waiting for. She's returned from the fields of Moab. She's returned from Lot. Moab is Lot's child, right? She's returned and she's coming back. And that means that something dramatic is happening. The problem of chesed that has been haunting the people for centuries. How do you do chesed without? How do you become a kind, godlike person without destroying? How do you even receive Torah from God? Is now going to be answered. What is the answer? So I'm going to give it very briefly. In chapter 2 gives the primary version of the answer. And the answer is a radical inversion of everything we think. The scene is that Ruth says, I'm going to go to a field of somebody I find favor in their eyes. She's wandering around. She happens to end up in the field of Boaz, who happens to be a relative of the Naomi's family. And Boaz is really nice to her. He treats her very nicely, looks after her in the field. And then something very strange happens. In the middle of it, while Boaz is being so nice, Ruth decides to interview him. She literally turns around and goes, she bows down and she says, now she falls on her face and she says, why are you being nice to me? Why are you being so, I'm a stranger, I don't get this. Just, you feel like saying to her, first of all, there's biblical laws that they have to treat the poor nicely and let you glean in the field. But second of all, just say thank you so much and get on with it. What are you interviewing the guy for? And he says, Boaz says, oh no, you got it all wrong. It was told to me, all the way that you looked after your mother-in-law. After your husband died, and you abandoned your father's house for Eretz Moladetech, the land of your birthplace. Where have we heard those phrases before? Avraham. She's gone from the world of Lot to the world of Avraham. Abraham. God says to Abraham, go on a journey from your land, your birthplace, and your parents' home. You abandoned your parents' home and your ancestral lands, etc., land of your birthplace. You went to people you didn't know the day before. Yishalem Hashem palech, may God repay you. Only God can pay you. You think I can repay you? Yimaskutech shlema, may your reward be complete. By the way, there's an amazing play on words there. He may have either been prophesying or been unconscious of the words he's using. But of course, you could read it, may your reward be Shlomo, Solomon, which ends up being, Solomon ends up actually building, when he builds the royal palace, he has a throne for the mother of royalty, for his great-grandmother Ruth. Might not have been alive at that time, but he understands the link. So yeah.
Is she a direct descendant of Ruth?
Yes, absolutely, all the Moabites are. I assume, it's possible somebody intermarried somewhere, but in principle, yeah, direct descendant. Now, may God, Hashem Elokei, so Hashem God of Israel, reward you, because you've come under his wings, which has a double meaning. You've also brought his presence in. Now, she says, I don't need good. I found favor in your eyes. I won't be like one of the maidservants. In other words, I wouldn't. Had you turned around and said, look, I feel really sorry for you, you're this Nebuch nobody, she would have walked away, because she's acutely sensitive to this stuff. She's a Moabite. She understands it. That's why Timna just described her once she came back into the town as Rusa Moabit. She feels very Moabite. She gets the issue. But he didn't say, you're a Nebuch, I feel sorry for you. He said, I honor you. We can't even pay you back for the way you've looked after your mother-in-law. You're a modern day in a society that's desperately in need of spiritual elevation. You are the modern day Abraham, and you brought God's presence with you. You think, I'm doing you the favor? It's our honor to try and give you something. So dignity is an issue, but watch what happens at the end. She comes home overloaded with goods, like she's got weeks worth of stock here from one day in the field. And her mother-in-law says to, what has happened? In Pasuk Chof Beis, Naomi says to, let's just go a bit further back. Pasuk Yud, verse 19. Where did you glean today? Who's the guy who did this for you? Yehi makirech baruch. May the one who recognized you be blessed. And she said to her mother-in-law, Ish asher asisi imoy, the guy I worked for today is called Boaz. Now this is so weird. What do you mean the guy I worked for? You didn't give him anything. You didn't give him any crops. You didn't give him any grains. You took from him. You didn't. The English says the name of the man by whom I worked, but that's not what she says. Who looked after you today? Oh, the guy I looked after? he's called Boaz. What do you mean? And here is an amazing Chazal. Rashi brings it here. It appears in a few places in the Medrash. One of them, by the way, is last week's Sedra in the Vayikra Rabbah in Parshas Bahar. You see it in the Megillat Ruth Rabbah. You see a few places. It says an amazing thing. More than the rich person does for the poor person in charity, the poor person does for the rich person. More than the calf wants to nurture from its mother, the mother wants to feed the calf. That's how it goes. In other words, Ruth is acutely aware of this. She's saying to her mother-in-law, listen, I understand. He gave me grains. He's a very wealthy man, and I took the grains. Fantastic. But do you think this was one way? Do you know what I gave him today? I walked around today. I gave him dignity. I turned him into a giver. I made him godlike. Who gave more for whom? Food or greatness? Food or dignity? I gave him at least as much as he gave you. So the man I looked after for today was called Boaz. That's how I look at the world. See how powerful this is? You know, she said, it's an amazing thing. She's real with this. She says, you know, I interviewed him. I wasn't going to let any Tom, Dick and Harry have that privilege today. I had more to give them than they had to give me. And I interviewed him. And he passed the interview, and I let him decide to be the chesed guy today. In other words, she sees a different paradigm. It isn't about who's got the power and who's powerless, who's the giver and who's the taker. We're sharing together. Acts of chesed require partnership and relationship. It might be technically the transfer works in this direction, but it's really in two directions. If you're thinking of givers and takers, this society's over. Because all you'll end up with eventually is rich people resenting the poor people for being lazy and not working enough, poor people resenting the rich people for having so much right and they taxed more, and you'll just have warring factions and political factions. That's okay. Look at your city. Do you understand what the real world is? It's that we build a society together. God put me in a situation without and you with. I can offer you dignity, you can offer me money. This is how we build the world. Each building together. It's not about givers and takers. It's about sharers and relationships and receivers. This is a radical paradigm shift. This creates the possibility of rejigging the entire way we look at chesed, at kindness. And it moves in that way because Normie hears this. And Normie literally says, wow, you know, this is amazing. If this is what's going on, if this is how you think, then I can ask you to do something that would normally be impossible. It's called yibum. What's yibum in the Torah? Yibum in the Torah is if a man dies childless, the brother marries, or at least if they both consent, then marries the widow. Otherwise they could do chalitza if he refuses. She can also ask for the chalitza, but otherwise, they do chalitza and they separate, but ideally they marry. And why do people not want to do this? The Torah is full of stories of people. By the way, both Boaz and Ruth come from before the Torah was given. The Ramban says, is it the Ramban? It says, I think the Ramban says it, that certainly there's a long emes Yaakov on this, on Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, is that before the Torah is given, any relative would do it. After the Torah is given, it's only brothers who are allowed to. But conceptually, it's restoring the family. In a way, what Lot and his daughter did is a kind of a yibum. Right, her husband had died. So the father stepped in. Okay, desperate measure. They thought they were the last people. Whether that's okay or not, separate question. But that's what they did. Yehuda ended up doing the same thing. Right. Remember that Tamar, Yehuda's two children die. Why did the second child die? Onan die because he refused to consummate the act of intimacy. Why? Because he knew ki loy yazera, it will not be his own child. The child will be called after the father. The land inheritance will go after the previous brother. And therefore he refused to, and he acted in a way that could give him pleasure but could produce no child. And because of his refusal to restore the seed of his brother, he died. Yehuda may not have known this, just sees all these boys are dying marrying this woman. She ended up doing the whole act where she pretended to be somebody else. Bottom line, he ended up having the child through her. That became Boaz, right? That's the lineage of Yehuda. So they all come through Yibum. But the problem with Yibum is it's zero sum. The brother's being asked to resurrect his own brother, which means he's going to invest in the child, raise him, do everything, and they'll just remove the inheritance, take everything away. That takes a lot of selflessness. Now, in halacha, the brother's supposed to do it. I mean, again, unless they don't want to, but in principle, if they both want to do it, then they would do it. But in halacha, there's no further relative meant to. But Normie says, I've got a problem. In theory, somebody should marry me, right? Now, Boaz is not a brother, but as a further relative, perhaps he could marry me and do Yibum. But I can't have children anymore either. She's just said so. I can't have children. So she's going to say, Ruth, can you do the equivalent of Yibum even though there's no obligation? Because you did marry into our family. Can you become a surrogate for me and have my children? And he'll be a surrogate for my husband and we'll resurrect the family that way. Now, till now, you'd say, what are you talking about? Ruth wants to, the whole point of the dialogue before, you want to have children, not have children, right? Ruth wants to have a child, a husband suitable for her. We actually say the Gemara in Yevamah says, you can't just go and marry an old man again and a young woman. The Sanhedrins, the Beis Din's meant to ban marriages like that. Okay, you can't put an exact number on it, it depends on compatibility and so on, but in principle we don't want things like that happening. And people should be compatible, similar age, whatever. Now listen to how Normie puts it. Normie, her mother-in-law, says, Biti, my daughters, beginning of the 3rd chapter. You know I'm looking out for a good shidduch who's perfect for you. I care about you. Now look, this Boaz, he's our relative. Wasn't that a contradiction? I'm looking out for a relative. I'm looking out for you. Well, I'm actually also looking out for me. Not if you're called Ruth. Not if you don't perceive the world as zero sum. She can 100% be in a relationship that's good for Normie and 100% be in a relationship that's good for her. And there's an amazing dialogue that takes place with a series of what you call Kriik sieves. Kriik sieve is when it's written one way in the text, but it's by tradition supposed to be pronounced differently. And Normie says, go down to Boaz in the field. He's going to be at the threshing floor tonight. V'rochat, you should wash. V'sacht, put on your oils or perfumes. Samt sim leisach, and then put your clothes. And you should go down to the barn. This is the 3rd pasuk of the 3rd chapter. But amazingly, it's not written, you will go down to the barn. Do you know how it's written? V'yoradati hagorin, I will go down to the barn. In other words, got 2 meanings. Go down as me, as my surrogate, and go down as you. Right? Interesting. There's 2 relationships going on here simultaneously. You are going to look for your perfect husband, and you're going to go to be the surrogate for me. And that continues. Next pasuk will be when he lies down. You will know the place that he lies there. You should go and cover his feet. And you shall lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. But the written text doesn't say you will lie down. I will lie down. So it's 100% you, and it's 100% me. And she says, Ruth replies, all that you tell me to do, I will do. But the word for me, Eli, is not written in the text. I'll be 100% there, and it will absolutely not be me there at all. It'll be me, and it will be you. And this continues all the way through the story. I'm not going to go through all the details of the story. It's a very beautiful, it's a very amazing story, full of hints and cross-references to other parts of Tanakh, hints at King David, hints at all these things, amazing things, but we just don't have time to go through. But when twice Ruth gets asked the same question, who are you? Once by Boaz. Okay, you can imagine he's startled in the middle of the night. He gets up, there's someone there, it's a woman. He doesn't know what to do with himself. According to the rabbis, he just finished burying his own wife and children a few weeks earlier, right? But it's suddenly a woman's here in the middle of the night. Okay, that's legitimate for him to go, who are you? But then in the morning when she returns to town and he's given her some gifts, and he said to her, we can't consummate the marriage between us because there's another redeemer who's closer in line. But I promise you, I'll look after you in one way or another. This will happen. If it's not through me, it'll be through him. But the family will have its redemption. You'll have a nice husband, right, etc. So she comes back home, and her mother-in-law says, "Mi at Pasuk Tezayin, verse 16. Mi at Biti. Who are you, my daughter?" Now here you can't say she didn't know who she is because she says my daughter. So what's she mean? So obviously, who are you? Are you or are you me? And she replies and says, she comes and she says everything the man had done. And she says the things, he gave me these 6 barley corns because he said to me, Ki Amar Eli, he said to me, that's pronounced but not written. And I'm me and I'm you. Don't go empty-handed to your mother-in-law. In other words, she's saying to her, I came 100%, this is my relationship. I would love to marry him. and 100% this was about you and redeeming the family. And she says, but he's told me that we've got to wait to see if somebody else wants to step in. We have to see how that one's going to work out. The mother-in-law says, right, don't do anything else. We have to wait to see how the matter falls. In other words, we humans have done all our inputs. We cannot control the outputs. And now Boaz goes up to the gate and calls a group of men together. And since he's a prophet and a judge, he can make a court and they can decide. The law, the rabbi said, the subtext was, can you marry a Moabite woman? They ruled you can. Either way, he calls this redeemer in, and the redeemer says, I cannot. He says, I'm willing to buy back the lands, and Boaz says, well, if you buy the lands back, there's an act called redemption. Biblically speaking, if somebody has to sell their land because they're poor, relatives are supposed to buy it back. Also last week, Sedra, right, in Parshas Bahar, that we're meant to buy back the land, and it's called Geula, it's called redemption. And this happens over here. Now Boaz says something that's not obviously the halacha. He says, if you do, you have to marry Ruth. And the question is, why? And it seems a possible answer is because halachically speaking, the only grounds for redemption is that you buy back the land, but in the Jubilee, in the Yovel, it will go back to their original family. Right? That you're buying back their ancestral lands. But since here all the men are dead, when it goes to the tribal families, it won't go back to her. It'll go to you. Well, that's not called redemption. To do that, you have to resurrect the family. You have to marry Ruth. You have to have a child who the family will consider to be their own. That's probably what's going on there. Anyway, the man says, I have to marry Ruth. Oh, I can't do that. I'll damage my inheritance. Double meaning. A, I'll buy the land and lose my inheritance, but also I will lose my reputation. This is a xenophobic town. This is a town where they can't talk nicely to strangers. There was evidence of that earlier in the text. This is a place, and Boaz in fact had to institute emergency decrees, getting everyone to use God's name when they meet each other, so they start to look at each other as divine, as a pathway to God. This was a town full of xenophobia and full of hatred, full of all these problems. And so, I can't do this in this town. Marry the stranger, marry the convert. What'll happen to my reputation? I meant to marry the noble elites. And Boaz says, okay, thank you very much. In that case, I'll marry her. Now, a few things happen. Number one, ironically and poignantly, the man who refuses to fulfill the biblical command of loving the convert because of the social dysfunctional attitudes that the town still had, or at least he was worried they still had it. Remember, they've been changing slightly. Boaz has been working on them. People have seen Ruth's greatness. Lots of things happen, but he still lives in the old model of the town. The man who cared so much about his reputation and his name is the one man in Tanakh who we do not know his name. He's known as Ploini, Mr. Anonymous. There's a certain power to that. But number two is everybody in the town had gathered to see this, and watching this take place, and then Boaz himself stepping in, seems to have been the final straw, in a good way, of the radical transformation of the whole town. And now they say something incredible. Right? Again, we're now jumping forward to the last little bit. Pasuk 11 of the 4th chapter. I apologize, we might run slightly over time today. I think the last few psukim are so emotional and so poetic and so beautiful that we just have to see them inside. Vayomru kol ha'am, all the people asher b'shar that were at the gate, v'azkenim and the elders, Adim as witnesses, says, Yitin Hashem as isha ba'al beisecha. May God give this woman who's coming into your home, they call her a noble woman, Rachel u'Leah, like Rachel and Leah. He's just been thinking the town's in its old model of rejecting the stranger, and whether it was because they've already changed as a town, or whether it's because this final act of Boaz taking her in and the way they've changed. Now they see this is, how we look at her? She's greater than all of us. She's greater than all of us. She's like as great as our ancient matriarchs, Rachel and Leah, Asher bonu shteim es beis Yisrael, who together the two of them built the house of Israel. Now, amazing thing about this is Rashi brings this all the way back in the story of the actual tribes themselves when they're being born. And Rashi says that the day comes, he proclaims the Medrash at the time, when there's always this rivalry between the children of Leah and the children of Rachel. When does it finally get resolved? Here. Because these are children in Beis Lechem, these are Israelites in Beis Lechem, which is the tribe of Yehuda, Judah, from Leah. And who did they just put first? May God make this woman come to your home be like Ka Rachel or Ka Leah. They put the other mother first. Do you know why? They've internalized the whole message of Ruth This is not zero sum. Till now we've thought if it's Leah, it's not Rachel. If it's Rachel, it's not Leah. The greater one is, the lesser the other is. We've just got a radically different paradigm going on over here. We've finally internalized the message that she came to teach us. That it's not who's the giver and who's the taker, who's got this, who's not. We don't live in zero sum. The more you give, the more we gain. The more we gain, we're all in this. We're building this thing together. We're all like cells in the same body. The heart cell just got some food. Oh no, the liver's losing. Nah, you crazy? We want the heart cell to have the more to be. We need everything. This is the world of Ruth. This is the world of outside the paradigm of the giver versus the taker. This is the sharing and the receiving. This is the world of Rachel is before Leah. And incredibly, they have a child. And they say, may be like parrots, may your house be like parrots that Tamar gave to Yehuda, revisiting that episode, from the seed that God will give you from this girl. And Boaz takes her, they have a child. And the women say to Naomi, remember now when she came back originally, they refused to talk to her. Baruch Hashem. Right, and they didn't treat her daughter-in-law nicely. She felt like a Moabite to emphasize when she came back into town. Baruch Hashem. Asher la hishbis lach gayel hayon, who did not remove from you a redeemer today. Vayikari shmo b'Yisrael. This name is going to get called in Israel. V'haya lach lemeshiv nefesh. This one will be to you restoring your soul. Will look after you in old age, because your daughter-in-law, Asher Ahevasech, who has loved you, Yaladatu has given birth, Asher Toiva Loch Mishiva Bonim. She's better for you than 7 sons. Now, amazing. So the whole town, which started with all the problem that we began the story, the breakdowns, has completely healed. The love of Ruth has healed the people. Also Boaz's contribution, which we didn't get to look at in the story as well. Naomi takes the child, now the miraculous happens, brings her and she nurses the child. Now whether that's meant to be a metaphor, that Ruth nursing the child is like Naomi nursing the child, whether it's literal and a miracle happens, one way or another, it's the same point. Ruth delivered Naomi's child. And in case not obvious, the neighbors say, Yulad Bain Lenormi, a child has been born to Naomi, and they call his name Oved, father of Yishai, father of David. And there we go, the genealogy. Peretz gave birth to Chetzon, Chetzon gave birth to Ram. Peretz was the child of Yehuda, right? Gave birth to Chetzon, Chetzon gave birth to Ram, Ram to Aminadab, Aminadab to Nachshon, Nachshon to Salman, Salman to Boaz, Boaz to Oved, Oved to Yishai. The Yishai heard of this David. Yishai gave birth to David. Now we're ready for Malchus, because kingship in a world where it's competitive, in a world where it's zero sum, that's power. And political power is destructive. King David's essence is not power. King David's essence is les le megar me klum. He has none of his own. The point of King David's kingship, as opposed to, let's say, King Saul. Saul was a humble man, but you make him a king, it goes wrong. David's is, he doesn't exist. He is the integration point through which the nation becomes one body. That's Malchus of David. And that can only happen when this story's been. And now you can say, okay, that's all beautiful. But what happened to poor Ruth over here? She gave birth to Naomi's child. She's given up everything and she's disappeared. Until you realize Ruth became the whole story. The story is Megillat Ruth. She's now everything. That's the power of this. You give yourself up entirely and you are the whole thing. And that's the answer to our relationship with God. How we can receive chesed, how we can have gratitude to our parents, because receiving is giving. Because God can give us a matan Torah, the gift of Torah, but what we have to do is Kabbalah Torah. Only we can receive it and turn God into the giver and turn His will into something that can be brought into fruition on earth. Yeah.
Why did it end with Shlomo? Like, I think that's
Good, because Shlomo is a combination of David. David is the paradigm. From then onwards, it never leaves. It develops. It reaches culmination. But Shlomo is Ben David in that sense. David is the Malchus. We always call it Mashiach Ben David, right? Because it's David's paradigm that becomes the way a Malchus is, and every good descendant who lives up to it does the same thing. So Shlomo does it and takes it to the maximal extent because he never had to fight the wars and he was born already completely within it. But it's really David. David is the direction. Of course, David is like this on every level. David has no aspect of himself whatsoever on a certain level. Because that's what he says to Michal. Michal says, how can you dance like a nobody? He says, that's your father and me. Your father was a very humble man, but he was himself. That doesn't work politically. A king, actum dictum. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Lord Acton, right? Very famous line. But David says, I can dance like crazy because that's not about me. I don't exist. I am now the integration point of the nation. That's why David dies on the day he's born. Because Adam sees into the future, the Medrash says, and sees all the generations, and sees there's going to be this figure called David, this power that dies the day it's created, and says to God, surely we've got to give him something. God says yes, but he has none of his own. So Adam, instead of living 1,000 years, who's the father of humanity, gives him 70 years of his life. Which means David is humanity. That's what he is. And that's, of course, he's born and dies on Shavuot. And so now you can see how all of these themes become one. We read it because of conversion. She isn't just any old convert. She brings a whole new dimension as to what conversion, what Kabbalah Satorah means. She changes the whole thing. We read it because this is the harvest where the rich give to the poor, but also the poor give to the rich. We read it because it's the birth and death of King David, because that's exactly what he is. The transition from the days of the Shoftim into Malchus needs this exact thing, and it needs everything that was taught us. And we're told this is only a book to teach us what chesed is, and it is. She resolves the problem of what kindness is by teaching us what it really is. But each side is always, kindness is not about who's the power and who's the powerless, who's the giver and who's the taker. It's about how we share the act of chesed and build it together. And that is how we can have a relationship with God. That's how we can receive His Torah. That's how we can celebrate Shavuos. And that's probably why the Gemara says that in Psachim says that there used to be an argument. Rabbi Yoshua said every Yom Tov should be half God, half Chetzi Lachem, Chetzi Lashem, half for you, half celebrating you, half celebrating God. And Rabbi Eliezer says, no, every Yom Tov should be either completely for God or completely for yourself. I guess if you're less spiritual, do it about yourself. If you're more, do it about God. If it's your body, look after that. If it's your soul, look after that. Except Shavuos. Shavuos, the day the Torah is given. That should be all about God then. Oh no, that's the whole point. You celebrate you and God, because the Torah couldn't be given if it couldn't be received. And that's a celebration of what you mean and what God means. Okay, so that's, I think, where I'm going to finish today.
Does that mean beggars should say you're welcome to people giving Sunday?
Beggars should be able to shift